Welcome to the Base Path Podcast, brought to you by New England Baseball Journal. I'm your host, Dan Guttenplan. Today's guest is in charge of the strength program with NEB Northeast Baseball Travel Program, Jake Willsey. Jake, thanks so much for taking the time.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we have a lot of parents of kids and, high school age parents in our audience, as well as high school kids who are, everybody seems to want to get that college scholarship or at least get an opportunity to play at the next level. I wanted to talk to you about your philosophy and kind of what you're doing these months out of the year to get guys ready for that, extended spring season right into the summer where, there are a lot of travel games and a lot of games to be played here through March all the way up through October. Yep. What's really the focus this time of year when guys come to you and say, hey, I want to get stronger in the off season?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, especially when you're working with like as diverse of a athlete population as we are. We got guys that are as young as 11 to guys in pro ball, right? So they're all at different phases of what is going to be their off season and in season, and you're gonna treat each one a little bit differently, right? So as we speak, I just got a text from one of our pro guys out in Arizona. He's going to be doing something a lot different than the high school guys who have their first pitch scheduled for a different time, right? So everything that we do is going to be very structured, not only to the time of year for the athlete, but to the athlete themselves, right? So different athletes are going to need different things at different points, and I think it's hard to put every athlete on the same, like, you need to be doing this at this time of year sort of schedule, I guess.
Right.
We'll have our athletes that at this time of year, so say, this is kind of like peak off season. We're looking at snow on the ground, right? So we're definitely going to be emphasizing some things pretty strongly in the gym that we probably won't be doing come, springtime or in season time, right?
Right.
So as far as for any parents listening, it's definitely goes to it is a somewhat phasic. Now, the way we're going to approach it, it's not like we're going to go one phase focusing on one thing, two phases focusing on another, and then in the season we'll focus on something else. We're focusing on everything all the time. It's just in different dosages, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because we have to manage, things like recovery and certain things take longer to build up. So something like strength or energy system stuff takes a while to build up. You have to accommodate that. You're not going to build that in season. You're going to maintain that in season. So everything is somewhat cyclical when it comes to the training structure for each athlete.
What's the athlete assessment process like when you get somebody who is coming to you for the first time, say they just started with NEB and right. They are getting in their first off-season program? Are you taking a look at like shoulder strength? Is there a force plate type of testing, or what type of testing do you do?
So we put all of our new athletes through the usually a very similar battery of tests. If we see something kind of unique, we'll throw something else in there. But in general, we'll get their posture pictures, some dynamic movement assessments, some table tests, and we'll go into some medicine ball throws that are going to be position specific, and frankly, a little bit more movement specific too. So we'll have different battery of med ball tests that are going to show us different movement capacities for different positions. So a hitter is going to go through a battery of 3 different med ball tests. A pitcher is going to go through a battery of 4 different med ball tests at different med ball weights. It's all telling us something different that we can kind of try and attack. What we're trying to do in our assessment process is to get as clear a picture of the athlete as we possibly can, so we know what we need to attack, what eggs we need to put in what baskets and when. And after we go through our med ball battery, we'll do force plate assessments, vertical jump. For pitchers, I actually really like the a plyo push-up on the force plates. I've seen some pretty cool stuff with that. As something as detailed as like hand contacts, and the plyo push-up can be really nice for pitch design. And we'll do our ISO pull, get sort of your max strength sort of test that we can monitor over time. One thing we have that I actually really like, that's kind of, I don't know how many places have it, we have a little vibration platform. We get each athlete to step on there. We can kind of use the shirt wrinkles as sort of a tell for what spaces they have available, how energy is propagating to the system and stuff like that. And that's a really cool thing to monitor over time as we see spaces start to open up and really translate to the biomechanics on the field.
Wow. So I know you played at Tulane and then you played professionally too as well, didn't you?
You could say that very loosely. Yeah. I played a few years of independent ball and overseas for a season. Nothing, not I didn't make it to the big leagues by any means.
Was this type of technology available to you in the strength room when you or in the weight room when you were coming up through
Yeah.
baseball?
So that's actually an excellent question. The short answer is no, it wasn't. And you see that the kind of technology boom that's going on right now, and it's really cool, and it's something that it's really important to immerse yourself within because you want to have as many resources as possible for your athletes at your disposal. Everything's testing something different. The more information you have, the better resource that you can be to create interventions. But a long story short, the way the technology's gone is unbelievable. I mean, you've got Newt Force mountains now. You've got all this stuff that can give you the most detailed possible picture of an athlete. Now, how you interpret it is ultimately what matters, right? How you interpret it, and then how do you intervene? That's what matters. But as far as the technology goes, it's pretty incredible to see how far the training side has gone.
Yeah, I was talking to a strength coach the other day who said you can almost get consumed by that stuff. He sees some kids come in and they're like, "Hey, I want to test this. I want to test this." And he's like, "Hey, there's something lost, where you're not just getting in there and working your tail off and, putting the work in for an hour, hour and a half. Now guys, they always want to see the analytics and the results, and they're not just going in there and working hard." Do you find that difficult to juggle?
I think that's something we actually do a really good job with. We are each of our athletes. It's very individual as far as how often we'll use that sort of stuff with each athlete. I'll have guys that I'll force plate test them daily. I'll have guys I'll take a check in once a month to make sure we're still on track. And then I'll have guys I have on a table every single day. I'll have guys that I'm testing a different dynamic test every single day. It's just very athlete dependent, but you're absolutely right. This, especially with the sort of high school guys these days, they love the technology, right? So they all want to test stuff, test stuff, test stuff. And it's like, well, this test for you probably isn't our number one thing that we need to really be worried about right now. Let's stay focused on the task at hand. So that is a little bit of a juggling act, but where that comes in for us, it's like we just got to make sure everybody's on the same page as for what each athlete needs. They got to know it, right? And once that happens, everything runs pretty smoothly.
Yeah, MLB released their findings on a study. They were researching injuries, and I'm assuming you're in this industry, so you probably read through that. I didn't see a lot of people who found it super surprising or were shocked by anything in that report. Obviously, injuries have the gist of it was basically injuries are on the rise because guys are throwing harder, among other reasons.
Yep.
That's not the only reason, but
Right.
was there anything that like grabbed your eye when you were reading through that report? Anything that you found surprising?
Um, I wouldn't say surprising. No, I think it's all somewhat intuitive. I mean, the more you see spin rates go up and the more you see velocities go up, that's essentially more forces that you're putting on the system, right? And the
Mhm.
way that guys achieve things like spin and stuff tends to be through a lot of layers of what we would call compensation. Compensation isn't good or bad necessarily. It creates certain outputs, right? But the more you layer on and the more you layer on and the further you take it, the more risk you're inherently starting to create. So none of it is really surprising, especially as you see some of the metrics start to really skyrocket. It all adds up. Now, with that, it does change the landscape for us for sure, because prevention becomes a huge factor, especially for some of these pro guys that are throwing 100 miles an hour, right? We
Mhm.
have to do a really good job of understanding how they're creating the output, letting them create output that way, but also you got to be really careful about taking away the strategy. What you have to do is not let it get too far for them, right? Take away enough to leave as much output as they need while leaving them in a spot that essentially mitigates as much risk as possible.
Yeah, I wonder when I was reading through it, I was almost like, are they suggesting some type of protections in place? Because I think they were like, now relief, everybody's pitching like a relief pitcher. Like I'm going to throw it as hard as I can and try to get as much break on the ball as I can. And if I run out of gas in 4 or 5 innings, that's what happens. Guys aren't pitching
Yep.
9 innings anymore. Do you think there needs to be any protections in place? Like, hey, you can only use 4 pitchers a game, or whatever it would be that limits the amount of I guess, emphasis on velocity and spin rate.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a lot of different answers depending on who you ask that question to.
Yeah.
I'm a guy that is I'm in the high performance field, right? So
Mhm.
everything I do is catering towards maximizing that for my athletes, right? Now, that's not to say we're going to throw injury prevention out the window. We do an enormous amount of that,
Mhm.
but as somebody who's trying to create the maximum output for his athletes in a sustainable way, I want to see them let it rip. I want to see them spin the crap out of it. And it's my job to manage that for them, right?
Yeah.
I want them to go full send. They can worry about they can let me worry about managing it, if that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. Prevention is such a hard thing in baseball because it's such a different sport. Like, I guess, football can be a little bit like this where you need a week to recover in between games when you're giving max effort like that. And baseball, it's even by position, it's so different. Like pitchers,
Absolutely.
you're going to pitch about once a week. You get 5 or 6 days of rest. Hitters, you can get out there every day if you want in the cage, and you have to get out there every day, if you're playing games throughout the summer. How do you juggle like how to manage a pitcher versus how to manage a hitter, and like what those prevention strategies are?
No, that's another really great question. They're not the same. First of all, I'll start with that. Hitters are playing every single day. If you get a major leaguer, it's 162 games. If you get, minor leaguers, it's less, and then high schoolers, it's less. But they're playing for 6 months out of the year, right? Now,
Right.
what the demand of that playing every single day, but the way that you're creating your exertions is going to be a lot different as a position player. So you go hit, and you go sit down. Now you're doing it every single day. It adds up. That's a lot of volume. But what a pitcher is going to be doing is throwing essentially a maximum output throw with they're in the professional baseball. It's every 20 seconds now, right? They have to have the energy system preparation for something like that. Whereas a hitter needs to be prepared more for the sake of getting through 162 games, which is entirely different demand. And we
Right.
have to, these are all things that are trainable, right? And that's something that we try and take initiative with, because you just can't condition two guys that play two completely different positions the same way. It's just not optimal. And we're kind of, what we do is we try and optimize everything as to the maximum ability that we can. But so that's a great question, though. I love that. Yeah, you can't treat everybody the same. It's different demands.
In terms of recovery technology, you see people wearing like compression or massage types of things now, or, they have the massage guns. I've seen some facilities use saunas and things like that for recovery. What type of technology are you using to help players recover?
Honestly, it's probably less than most. What the way we treat recovery. So let's just take pitcher, for example, right? The way that we treat recovery is through the lens of like what's creating the risk, right? So every pitcher, you look at their throw, and this is part of our intake assessment, which I probably should have mentioned before. We do go through a little bit of like a mechanical analysis with them and correlate it with what we see in the assessment, but that's sidetracking. So what we've done with our athletes is we've gone through the assessment of the actual throw, how they're accomplishing output, what their capabilities are via dynamic movement tests, all the screening that we do. We see where they're creating what might be called like compensations or things like that might be helping them create output, or sometimes in some cases impeding their output. And what we do is after they throw, we'll give them a routine to try and strip away some of that, so it doesn't become an accumulation of compensatory activity that eventually becomes maladaptive, right? So what we do is we'll have our guys throw. Let's say they throw a bullpen, right? We'll give them 3 to 6 post bullpen activities that are essentially, you can think of it simplistically as like a almost like a recapture sort of thing, to try and put them in a position that will be essentially less of the position that they're using to create maximum effort throws as they're walking around day-to-day life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to necessarily use stim therapy or stuff like that, because let's say you throw you zap a muscle that's already twisted. We're just not going to really do that. We're just going to untwist it, right? So yeah, we don't use a lot of, as far as recovery tech goes, we don't use a lot, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. You said you start getting guys at the age of 11. And like you said, that's going to be different from, what you're going to do with college guys or pro guys.
Mm-hmm.
You really want to kind of get the movement patterns and get them to get familiar with the weight room at that age.
Yes.
What are some of the intro things you can do with, there's probably parents of 12-year-old kids, 11-year-old kids that want their kids to, hit the ball farther and throw it harder. What are some of the things you see in terms of maybe a deficit that you usually get with players at that level that they can work on right away?
Yeah, it's for those guys, it's really about like what's the lowest hanging fruit here, right? A lot of them, it's it's going to be stuff like, coordination, force production, all those sort of quote unquote basics, S&C sort of things, right? Though
Mhm.
the youth athlete is where that really becomes the lowest hanging fruit, right? You will get like pro guys in. It's like our time and effort probably isn't best spent for these guys working on, coordination and max force output. It's just not. For the younger athlete, it's like that's where they're going to get their greatest return on investment, right? So we'll do a lot of, more quote unquote traditional stuff with these younger guys. We'll have an eye on them because it's really important that these guys at a young age start doing things the right way, and they can really start to build a foundation that they can like build a really nice structure on top of as they get older. So the youth, the getting guys in young and establishing a foundation is really good for long-term development.
Do you find yourself ever asking players to pull back a little bit, whether it's, stop playing as many games, if you're playing 25 in the spring and 40 in the summer, maybe, high school kids don't need to be playing 65 games a year? Or where do you see guys or where do you see people that with a need to kind of scale it back
Yeah.
a little bit?
It's really hard for high school guys these days, especially within the recruiting landscape. Because the way that recruiting is going now, it's not the same as it was when I was in high school, however long ago that was. It's different now, and you do have to kind of respect that, and that makes our job a little bit different than it would have been in the past. There's times where these guys need to be ready to go at times that they otherwise might not have been in the past, right? So we have to make sure guys are prepared, a lot of times through the fall even, whereas it used to be not necessarily as much that way.
Right.
But yeah, long story short, you definitely have your guys that, especially if with our intake, right? We have different KPIs, key performance indicators for different guys. Depending on what your KPIs are, if a guy's just exerting himself too much, like you see the data on something like the whoops that guys have now, right? So you can utilize that as a tool, right? And let's say our KPI is starting to really trying to recapture some space to move within, and their strain is through the roof. Those things probably aren't congruent. It's like, okay, let's start to peel it back a little bit. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe they're just not. Maybe it's not as much my fault. But making sure everybody's on the same page in some instances of like, okay, more is not always better. Better is better, and that's a big thing that we try and instill in our athletes because I was that age, right? I did more, 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 more. But, in hindsight, I realized that probably wasn't in my best interest. It's not more is better. It's always better is better.
Are you tracking nutrition or sleep with high school guys, or is that more, try to make your
I'll,
best effort?
I'll check in.
Yeah.
I've learned that's not really something I can have a lot of control over, to be honest.
Yeah.
You got I love when these guys have whoops because it gives me immediate access to a lot of this data, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I'll check in with guys a lot of times about like seeing how their recovery went, how their sleep went, and sometimes we do need to make modifications based on that because you got that, especially with the high school guys, right? They have demanding schedules with school and everything like that that just needs to be respected, right? So you see like having a kid come in 4 to 6 days a week and just crushing it, that's not from a stimulus recovery adaptation perspective. Like that's not going to be in their best interest, right? And we these are all things that are always at play that need to be accounted for.
Is it difficult to manage expectations of parents, because they're paying for this stuff and, they want to see a return on it. And you're saying, like you said, if they're coming in 4 days a week and crushing it, that might be detrimental actually to what they're trying to achieve in the off season. Is it hard to say to them like, hey, I know you're paying for this, but we gotta pull back a little bit?
Um, I, I'm very fortunate. I haven't had much issue with it, to be completely
Oh, okay.
honest. I think it's mostly probably luck, but one thing that we do, I think, a pretty good job of is tracking things over time. So if we can always go back to the numbers, right? And this is something I try to do a decent job of with our athletes is just to as an accountability measure for them, but also for me and JP, my other performance coach. It keeps everybody in the gym accountable to track things over time, right? So let's say somebody's worried about not seeing the results they want. It's like, okay, let's go to the data. We've been keeping an enormous data set, right? We'll be able to point to stuff like this got better, this didn't get better. Let's make a modification. Is it my fault as the coach? I didn't give you the right stimulus. Is it your fault as the athlete? You didn't execute this the way that we discussed, right?
Right.
Now, when it comes to parents, it's like that's also a useful tool, right? you got to have something that you can point to when you're in a business like this to I don't want to say prove it, but like you got to be able to have something objective that shows that what you're doing is, being successful.
Right. You mentioned the recruiting landscape changing significantly since when you were getting recruited. You went to Rivers School in the ISL, so you had experience getting recruited as a prep school kid here. Now it just seems like the entire recruiting process happens later because the NCAA made a rule that you can't be in contact with coaches or be on campuses until July before your junior year. But even with that, it's happening later because so many coaches are in the transfer portal to try to make quick fixes to their rosters. Fewer guys are getting recruited out of high school. That postgraduate year has become more popular for guys as they try to kind of extend their careers and wait for opportunities to become available at the college level. What do you think of the state of the game, the state of the college game?
A little bit of a loaded question. um, I can't emphasize enough how different it's become. The transfer portal thing, NIL even, it's so different than when I was recruited. When I was in high school, it's like you go play ball after your junior year that summer, and you get there, your options come up or they don't. It was
Right.
very simple, for lack of a better word. It wasn't that complicated. It has gotten so unbelievable. I feel for these high school guys, right? I see them all the time, and the stress it puts them under, right? Which it's like at that you go back to like communication with the athletes. It's like they, they're under so much stress to perform and get the scholarships that may be fewer and far between because of stuff like transfer portal and stuff like that. It's like, okay, they all want to go max output now because they think that's going to get them to the highest velocity the quickest. That's just not the reality, right? So
Right.
the actual change in recruiting landscape has created an interesting dynamic within the high school athlete in the gym too, because ultimately they want the quick fix because they feel like they need it in order to get recruited because there's maybe less opportunity than there might have been in the past, right? But
Right.
ultimately, what my job is to ensure of like I would love nothing more than have every single athlete come into my gym and just rip their heaviest back squat. That would make me the happiest guy in the world. But I can't in good conscience do that knowing what I know about, development within the sport, right?
Right.
So it's a complicated the recruiting landscape is a complicated thing to maneuver with the high school athlete these days.
Yeah, for sure. How did you end up with NEB? I know did you play with NEB at the high school level, or how
Yeah.
did you become?
So I played for Scott Patterson with the Rays the summer of 2011 and 2012. Graduated high school in 2013. I worked for Scott as a you know instructor, for lack of a better word, every off season through college and beyond. And after that, I started working for Scott. I continued working for Scott after I stopped playing, more full time. I've been with NEB in some capacity since 2011.
Hmm.
So what is that? Almost 15 years now. Now I own the stable, which is attached to NEB in the same facility.
Yeah.
But I still at the same time do a lot of work with NEB, whether it be I coached in the summers. I have 2 days a week dedicated to hitting with the NEB guys. So as far as my relationship with NEB goes, it's a very close relationship. NEB's been a huge part of my life for almost 15 years now, and the opportunities that have come my way are not dissimilar from everybody else that seems to come through NEB. It's an unbelievable place.
Yeah, you see on all the shirts the best play here at NEB. What kind of makes NEB different in terms of the way you guys train and the way you compete?
Culture. The word I mean that's just a simple answer. It's culture. The culture of the Northeast baseball program is second to none. That you don't really experience anything else like it. And the I think the standard is not it's unique, and it's probably not for everyone. But the standard here, and that's why we've been so successful at NEB. And it's the coaching that you'll get here is pretty unique. I know myself and Scott and everybody else takes an enormous amount of pride in the players. It's not necessarily wins and losses, but the player successes. And that tends to lend itself to a really unique place when everybody genuinely cares about the success of each other, coaches to players, players to players. It lends itself to a really cool dynamic that I just don't think you find in many places where, especially these days, everybody wants to essentially what's best for themselves a lot of times. And that's just not what you find here. It's really cool. It's I can't really say enough about the culture that exists within those walls.
Yeah, I get those texts from Scott whenever he's got another, D1 commit or something. He's like, "Hey, we're up to 25 now." He'll just send me lists of guys.
I mean, Scott's been like my second father for a long time. I can't say enough good things about that guy, to be honest.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Netting Professionals is proud to be the official netting partner of the Cape Cod League and the New England Collegiate Baseball League. Netting Professionals is in the sports business of improving athletic programs one facility at a time. Netting Professionals designs, fabricates, and installs custom netting, wall padding, windscreen, batting practice equipment, and much more for high schools, colleges, commercial facilities, and stadiums throughout the United States while providing high-quality products and great service to numerous baseball programs throughout the New England area. To learn more and to speak to a Netting Professionals representative today, visit them at nettingpros.com. Remember, when it comes to netting, it's Netting Professionals.
Are you serious about playing your sport in college? Do you need a flexible education that allows you to maintain your practice and competition schedules while also preparing you to succeed at the next level? You should check out the University of Nebraska High School. UNHS is accredited and offers more than 100 online courses, including NCAA-approved courses to protect your academic eligibility. Students could earn a UNHS diploma or take a single course for transfer credit. Courses are college prep, self-paced, and available 24/7, 365. Enroll anytime and take up to a year to complete a course. Visit highschool.nebraska.edu today.
Jake, do you have a few minutes to hang in there for our 3 Up, 3 Down segment? Just general interest baseball questions, stuff that helped you fall in love with the sport?
Yeah, love to.
Oh, nice. All right. Well, let me introduce you to our producer, David Yaz.
Another edition of 3 Up, 3 Down. Let's get there.
3 Up, 3 Down.
3 Up, 3 Down, where I give 3 questions to both of our panelists here, and they're completely unprepared for this, so be prepared for thrills and surprises all along the way. First question is for you, Jake, and the question is pretty simple. Why don't baseball players, and I'm talking about Major League Baseball primarily, why don't they throw as many innings as they used to? What happened to the days of Wilbur Wood, who in 1972 threw 376 innings in one season? By comparison, in recent years, leaders have included Max Scherzer, of course, with 220 innings, Verlander 223, a far cry from the 376 of yesteryear. I know there are many reasons, but if you had to pick a couple, Jake, what say you?
I'd say number one would be analytics. The more that's taken over the game, the more decisions tend to be made based on, numbers and statistics. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing by any means. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But you have the whole third time through the order data that we've seen many times leads to some interesting decisions. You can go back to Blake, the whole removal of Blake Snell in the playoff game in whatever year that was.
Yeah, that hurt.
Yeah, analytics is I would say the number one reason to be completely honest. I think there's been a greater emphasis in injury prevention too, especially in more recent years as that sort of stuff has become more and more prevalent. But number one, I would say, would be analytics.
So is there something to I don't want to put you on the spot too much here, Jake, but if you had to pick good thing, bad thing, there is a school of thought out there that says the pitchers are too coddled and the heavier workload might even be beneficial to and keeping an arm loose and healthy. But what say you?
As far as like if analytics are beneficial or not?
Yeah, well, as far as should pitchers be throwing more generally? Yeah.
Well, this is kind of a cop-out answer, but like I would take a very individualized approach. I would like to know the dynamics of the thrower in question and some of the stresses that he might be accumulating. I guess that's just me taking my performance coaching, putting my performance coaching hat on here. But I do think that pitchers probably do have especially if they have, the proper training, have a capacity to throw more innings in a season. I think we've seen that. But they would definitely have to be prepared maybe a little bit differently.
Right. Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's probably right, that analytics, like you can see the diminishing returns, when you get the third time through the order, or even all the way back to Pedro, you could see once he got to 100 pitches, it got ugly for him, or even, what was it, 90 pitches, 95 pitches?
Let's not relive it.
He kind of fell off a cliff.
Because we know the game he probably should have been taken out of. Well, that's a popular opinion anyways. But yes, please continue.
But I'm doing the math in my head for this Wilbur Wood, 376 innings. So that's, say you pitch 9 innings every time. That's more than 40 starts. So he's pitching every fourth day he's pitching, and he's going 9 innings per start. Like, I don't think that'll ever happen again.
He might have been a knuckleballer. I know the other guy who had a mark barely close to that was Phil Niekro, who was a knuckleballer. So that has something to do with it. Wakefield used to put up some pretty good innings numbers, but yeah, it's but if you look at the innings, it's impossible to compare, I think, because if you look at the single season innings records, the first 100 names are all pre-1900. They all threw.
Those guys are just pitching every day.
They also all threw 78 to 82. I think that's something that we need to bear in mind here. Asking a guy who's throwing 96 to 98 every bullet he throws to throw 300 innings probably just wouldn't be sustainable from just a logical perspective.
No, I think that's right.
Exactly. All right, final question for 3 Up, 3 Down. There are, of course, 5 tools in baseball. They say hitting for average, hitting for power, speed, throwing, defense. Among the 5, Jake, what would you say is the most overrated and which is the most underrated?
Ooh, wow. All right, I'm going to take a very simplistic view because you can take things like, idiosyncrasies into account here pretty easily. I would say throwing, like arm velocity as a position player, would be the most overrated. I would stand very firm in that.
Okay. Why is that?
I think there's ways to get the ball where you need it to go quickly that aren't inherently tied to how hard you can throw it.
So we shouldn't be marveling at Ellie De La Cruz throwing 102 miles.
My bias would be no.
Okay.
But
Right.
I that's my personal bias. I would stand firm on that one being the least important of the 5.
Okay, sure. And what's the most important?
It depends on the guy, I guess. These days, the way the game's going, it would be easy to say power. That's what pays right now. So it's hard to say anything other than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, good answer. Good answer. Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to go underrated power. You always hear coaches say, that's the last thing that develops. They're waiting for, even at the big league level, you hear managers sometimes be like, the power will come. It'll come in the next couple of years. Whereas I think when you get to the big league level, usually your speed is what it is. Your arm is kind of what it is. So the ability to develop power, I think, is underrated. And then overrated, I want to say speed just to be different, but you can use speed so well on defense too. I think the arm is probably the most overrated, especially if you're playing second base, you have to turn some double plays. The outfield, you once in a while are going to get a put out or throw to third base or something. But yeah, I think the arm is probably the most overrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially as a defender, feet and hands play. Even if you're turning a double play from second, you can get the ball second to first and 1-2-1-1, not throwing it that hard. Having seen it, right? So I think that's the one with the most workarounds, I would say.
Yeah.
So to close a loop that we opened earlier, Wilbur Wood, by the way, from Belmont, Massachusetts, which I did not know. He played for the Red Sox for a while, but of course, only after he left the Red Sox did he develop a terrific knuckleball. And just before the 1971 season, it was told to him by a coach that maybe he could pitch on 2 days' rests since he was a knuckleballer. So he went on to start a career-high 49 games in 1972. Can you imagine starting 49 games? Yeah. So
that's outrageous.
Different era. Although knuckleballers are fun. I hope we see another great one in our lifetime. Terrific job by you both on 3 up, 3 down. And Jake gets extra points because he fared very well from the comfort of his car because he has been driven from his home because it was noisy there. Thanks for being a good sport, Jake. Back to you, Dan, to wrap things up.
All right. Thanks to Jake Willsey for joining us on the Base Path Podcast. Rate, review, subscribe to the Base Path Podcast on your preferred platform. Thanks to our producer, David Yaz. The Base Path Podcast is a Siemens Media production.